Welcome to the Healthy Body, Healthy Mind podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kinghorn, co-founder and CEO of HBHM. We're a carbon neutral wellness brand and we're focused on the well-being of our customers and the planet. We produce a range of products designed to support a healthy lifestyle. This podcast is for our community. We will have a range of experts in the health, fitness and wellness space designed to help you all improve many aspects of your life. For listening to this podcast, you can get 15% off our products at hbhm.com by using the code HBHMPOD at checkout. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Healthy Body, Healthy Mind podcast. Today we have Fraser Clyne with us, who is a legend of running, one of Scotland's best ever marathon runners and long distance runners. During the 80s and 90s, Fraser had great success in running all over the world. He boasts a marathon personal best of 2 hours, 11 minutes and 50 seconds, which was set in 1984. And he's run faster than 2 hours 20 for a marathon on 22 occasions. He represented Great Britain at the World Marathon Cups on 3 occasions, as well as representing Scotland in the Commonwealth Games in 1986. He's either won or been in the top 5 at some marathons around the globe, including winning the Auckland Marathon twice, runner-up in Melbourne and Casablanca, 4th at the famous Twin Cities Marathon in Minneapolis, 5th in San Francisco, and a 6th place in Berlin, which is one of the world's marathon majors. He's a 5-time Scottish marathon champion and 3-time Scottish road running champion, and he competed in the World Cross Country Championships 5 times as well. He's represented his country on the track, on road, cross country, mountain running at everything from the 3,000 metre steeplechase all the way up to 100 kilometres and everything in between. So Fraser is now a successful sports writer and running coach and is involved in race promotion and race management. So welcome to the Healthy Body, Healthy Mind podcast, Fraser. It's amazing to have you on. How are you doing today?
Oh, fine, Brian. Thanks very much for inviting me to be on today. Today is a lovely day. I've even been out for my run, which is unusual for me to get up and get out there. But I did about 7 or 8K, which is the most normally I would do nowadays.
Yeah, nice one. Cool. So obviously I read out you've got quite a pedigree there. So before we bring it back to your running career, your marathon career, let's just get a bit of an update as to what you're up to now.
The last year's been a bit different as it has been for everybody, but I kind of split my time between, I do quite a lot of sports journalism, so that's usually reporting about athletics events, but they've been few and far between, profiling runners. And again, that's everything from people competing at international level down to trying to promote running locally in the local media. A bit of coaching. I got about 10 people that I coach on a one-to-one basis, and then I'm part of a group along with Robbie Simpson called Hidden Peak Running, which shortly will be returning to organising twice weekly group training sessions. So that's the kind of 2 main activities. The other thing that I have been involved in over quite a number of years is Run Balmoral, which is a big event in the northeast of Scotland, about 5,000 runners every year. We haven't had it. We didn't have it last year. We're not having it this year, but hopefully return in 2022. So I'm part of the management team for the Run Balmoral event, and we are now beginning to put things in place, hopefully for 2022. So that's the kind of 3 key things: bit of coaching, bit of sports journalism, the event management and promotion, and when time allows, a little bit of running.
And you've obviously the race organizer hat on. That can't have been an easy time over the last year, just negotiating all that different hurdles that COVID has presented to us.
Yeah, it's been a bit stop-start all the way through, and certainly in terms of group training sessions. We just got started and had to stop again, got started and stopped again. And just having to go through all the procedures of having small groups taking part. In terms of race management, with Run Balmoral, we were, basically about 6 weeks away from the event when lockdown happened. So it had to be cancelled at the last minute, which was a real nightmare because obviously virtually everything was in place for it. Then you got to contact everybody, offer them the option of, do you want your money back? Do you want to defer for next year? Not my job, but some of the other guys having to deal with the contractors that we hired to provide all the services that you need for a big event. So, there's quite a lot of work in dismantling something that doesn't even happen.
Yeah.
So, I think just as it has been for everybody, this past year has been difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned Robbie Simpson there as well, who's a previous guest on the podcast. So if you haven't yet listened to that one, go back and listen to Robbie as well for his story. So, okay, well, let's bring it back a bit then. So let's start chatting about your history in running. So how did it all begin for you? How did you get involved in running?
Well, I never ran as a youngster, really. I played football up until I was about 18, 19. But I wasn't very good at it, although I enjoyed it. And the thing I found about football was if you weren't very good, people weren't slow in telling you weren't very good. So it wasn't a very positive environment to be in. But there was one day, kind of my last year at school, when the football pitch was flooded. The gym was being used for something else, and the PE teacher said, "Right, you guys, you're going for a run." And he sent us out for this cross-country run, which must have been about a mile. It seemed like a marathon, but it was about a mile. And I finished ahead of all the good footballers. And I thought, oh, that's good. That was interesting. But that was the one and only time we did it. And it was only a couple of years later when I went to university in Aberdeen. Again, I was playing football, but in the winter, the games kept getting cancelled. And because the pitches were unplayable, and I just got fed up with that. And I thought, what could I do? And I remembered enjoying that cross-country run at school. So I decided, I'll try some running. And I joined the university cross-country club. And I was very fortunate that at that time there were a lot of really good people in it. One guy, Steve Taylor, who was a mature student, I thought he was ancient, but he was about 33. He was a former Scotland international and Scottish track champion. He kind of took me under his wing. A couple of other guys as well, a guy called Tony Millard and Ron Mon, who went on to become and still is one of the world's top exercise physiologists. He used to drag us into his lab in Marshall College to do some bizarre experiments from time to time. But it was a really good environment to be in, and I got a lot of encouragement. And that really just got me going. I eventually ditched the football and decided, I'm going to have a go at this. And I really enjoyed it. I got into the university team. My first ever serious race was the Edinburgh to Glasgow Road Relay, which was a big event back in it had been from the 1930s right through to the 1990s, early 2000s. But because I came into it late, I hadn't even been entered, so I had to run under an assumed name, which would get me banned now. So I think the leg I did was 20 teams in each leg, and I think I finished 17th, which I thought was great because I wasn't last.
Yeah.
And things just kind of progressed from there. I really enjoyed cross country. Was my introduction to athletics, and then the summer we did the track, and I got the chance to run at Meadowbank, which I thought was amazing because this was only a few years after the 1970 Commonwealth Games.
Okay.
And you would go to the National Cross Country Championships, and suddenly you're running against guys who had won Commonwealth titles. Lachie Stewart, who was the 1970 Commonwealth Games 10,000 metre champion, was running. Jim Alder, who'd been silver medalist in the Commonwealth Games marathon. I thought, this is incredible that you can actually be running in the same race as these people. I made good progress, but I wasn't running at a very high level. I was running for Scottish universities, British universities, teams. but getting closer and closer to international level. And I think the good thing was that, you can see your progress over a relatively short period of time when you get some organised training. And these guys that I was mixing with were great because they were willing to share lots and lots of good advice, tell you the things you should do. Just basic things that I thought warming up was a waste of time. I saw these guys running around before a race. I thought they're wasting their energy. I'd be standing still and then the gun would go off and you'd set off. And after about 200 meters, you're breathing heavily, wondering what's going on. These guys are saying, no, come on, you've got to do this properly.
Yeah.
It seems so basic, but it hadn't even crossed my mind. It was just, so they showed me what a proper warm-up routine was. Taught me that you can't just go out and run every day. You've got to start doing some structured training, some speed work, some longer store stuff. They introduced me to interval training, things like 20 by 200 meters, which some of the people I coach will be familiar with as a common session. So it was just a learning process for these first few years and kind of working your way up through the ranks. But I think probably the most important thing was, and still is for anybody in running, is that the people round about you were very, very supportive and more than willing to help you. And I found this the opposite of the football environment where, you hated your rivals and some of your teammates even, people weren't as encouraging. It's maybe different now, but certainly at that time, I found it was a totally different culture. And no matter who you were mixing with, eventually, my first internationals, you start speaking to guys who'd won Olympic titles and were world record holders. I thought, why are they just speaking to me not like they're anybody else? And it's because everybody's the same, and the whole athletics environment was like that. It was just so positive. And, if you were willing to listen, take on board what they were saying, try things for yourself, you could make great progress.
Yeah. And it's just, it's so many walks of life as well, surrounding yourself with, positive people that, are supportive and inspire you, brings extra performance out of you as well. Because you also, you see them achieving things and you're like, well, I train the same as these guys, so there's no reason why I can't go and do that. So it sort of spurs you on and pushes you on to catch them as well.
Absolutely. And I think, again, in Aberdeen, it was like that in the late 70s, early 80s. There were so many people that were running well and had done, the previous generation had run, top international level, that you couldn't help but think, well, I'm running with them every other day, so surely if they can do it, I can do it. And and I think that worked its way all the way through a group of runners. Once I started achieving some success, and my mate Graham Lang, who was about the same level as me, then the other guys on the team thought, well, if they can do it, surely we can do it too. And the overall standard just seemed to improve dramatically because of that. I think I mentioned Graham Lang there, that he was similar age to me, but he ran in the very first London Marathon in 1981 and finished 5th. Yeah. And I thought, whoa, that's incredible. Well, Graham and I would have probably a 50-50 record. He would beat me, I would beat him, whatever distance. And I thought, well, crikey, if he can do that, I'm sure I can manage something in the marathon. So that was my inspiration to move from, one of the reasons for moving from shorter distances into the marathon.
And how did that progression look from, shorter distance up to marathon? And just before we go on to that, you mentioned London Marathon. Did you not lead the London Marathon for a short spell in 1 year?
Yes. 1 year, I can't remember when it was now. But 1 year I agreed to help with the pacemaking for the first 10 miles. Yeah. So that was the reason for it. But I only decided to do that the day before. So I hadn't really told anybody. So I was doing my bit at the front. And then, of course, I stopped. And the next day, I came back home. I kept getting stopped by people in the street saying, "Oh, you were doing really well. You were leading. Then what happened?" And I was fed up telling this story. Well, I had no intention of, the only reason I was leading was because I was just doing the pacemaking. I had no intention of going any further than 10 miles. But yeah, it was. And the reason I did it was because I had done a marathon 3 weeks before, so I had no intention of actually doing the race seriously. And it was, I'd got the chance to go down to London anyway. And it was the guys at Nike said, "Would you help some of our guys with the pacemaking?" But it's not a job I would like to do very often. It's kind of puts the pressure on a wee bit, because you're not just running for yourself, you're running for somebody else. And that's really difficult because you don't know how they're feeling. And at one point, the pace went ahead of the pace that I'd been told to go at, the pace at the front. And I said, "Well, what do I do now? They've asked me to run this pace. Do I go with that?" So it's not an easy job for people doing it. And I think that's the only time I've done it. I wouldn't have wanted to do it again.
There's always going to be evidence now on YouTube of you leading that race, even though you weren't actually racing it. So back to then, how did that progression look from shorter distances up to, marathon?
Yeah, well, I think again, before the kind of running boom, up until the early 80s, there was a kind of natural progression for distance runners. You would start off, you would do cross country in the winter. And the season progressed, started off with the relays, 2.5 miles. The district championships were usually 6 miles, and the national championships 7.5. And then if you were good enough to make the national team, the world cross was 7.5 miles or 12K. So the winter kind of progressed through the distances, and then the summer was track. And we would do anything from 800, 1,500, 3,000, 5,000, very occasionally 10,000, but rarely. And then there might be the occasional road race in the summer or early autumn before the cross country started again. And there weren't a lot of races, so everybody kind of followed the same pattern. And the general progression was you're always told, try and be as fast as you can over the short distances before you move up. So you would naturally run a lot of 1,500s, 5,000 on the track before you go to 10,000. Once you maximise your potential at that, you would look to, the only thing beyond that was the marathon. There were no such things as half marathons. Okay. There was maybe a few 10-mile races and races of odd distances. They weren't standard. They would kind of be races from A to B, from one town to the other, whatever they were. But people tended to try and be as fast as they could at the shorter ones. And marathon running was very much for older runners who, were making that progression through their career. It was only when the boom happened that, people came into running and started running marathons straight off. So my progression was more traditional in that sense. In fact, when I ran my first marathon, it came at the end of a track season. And the longest race I'd done in the previous 4 or 5 months was 5,000 meters. Okay. And the marathon I did, it was Aberdeen Marathon, local marathon, which had a home countries international included in it. So it was quite a reasonable standard. But I just remember thinking the pace seemed so easy because I come from running 1,500 meters, 5,000 meters on the track to running marathons, and thought, this is easy. And at 23 miles, it suddenly didn't become easy. I'd forgotten that, I might have had the speed for it, but I didn't have the endurance at that time. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of, that was a bit of an experiment, but I also realized that I wasn't going to be, very good on the track. I didn't run a lot of big races, but the ones I did, it was just a different ball game. I ran a 5,000 meters at Crystal Palace one year, which had an incredibly good field. There was a guy called Henry Rono from Kenya who held every world record at that time from 3,000 meters steeplechase, 5,000, 10,000. So he was in the field. John Walker, who was the Olympic 1,500 meter champion, Eamon Coughlin from Ireland, who was the world 5,000 metre champion, and so on and so on. And I just remember getting to 3,000 metres in this race, and I was, in this big group, and I thought, oh, that's fine. I looked at the watch, and it was like 8:16 or 8:17, and my PB was only 8:14. And I thought, okay, you're doing fine. And then the race started. It was like, they just took off. It was so incredible. It's like running 3,000 metres flat out, then finding yourself at the start of a 2K race, because I think I finished 50 seconds behind the winner, and that was all done in the last 2K. So I thought, well, no, this is not for me. I'm going to have to try the longer stuff. So that was in my head at that time, was the way to go.
And what sort of times were you running for, like 5K and 10K and that side of things?
Consistently running 14:20, but that race that day was won in 13:30s or something, which at that time was quite good. I mean, the world record at that time was certainly over 13 minutes. Can't remember what it was, but it was certainly over 13 minutes. So like 14:20, and I seem to keep running 14:21, 14:22, 14:19. I just couldn't run any quicker, but I could keep going, So again, I thought, well, maybe I'm more attuned to trying the longer races. So as I say, I tried that Aberdeen Marathon. I tried a couple of other ones, but I went from, I think the first one was 2:23, the second one was 2:20, and the third one was 2:19:58. Yes, got under 2:20. But again, it was nothing earth-shattering. But there were never, these 3 races were running, every one of them was horrible conditions. I thought, surely I've got to get some decent weather. And I guess the semi-breakthrough came after that, because I got the chance to run this Oakland Marathon in California just by chance. It was actually in the middle of the winter, and I'd been training for cross-country. I had an eye on the London Marathon that spring, but I got a phone call from a guy saying, do you want to run in Oakland? I said, where is Oakland? He says, it's California. And I said, oh, yeah. I'll go to California in February. And I said, oh, by the way, what distance is it? Because I hadn't even thought to ask. Yeah. And he said, oh, it's a marathon. I thought, oh, no. But anyway, there had been some deal done with the race organisers in America and the Glasgow Marathon at the time. And the Oakland Marathon wanted a Scottish runner, and then they would send an American runner over to Glasgow. So that was the arrangement. So I went to Oakland, and I won the race. So and again, it was horrible weather. It was freezing cold. I went to get the sunshine, and it was Scotland. It was pouring with rain, windy, and it was an out and back course. I think we're about 71 minutes for the outward half into the wind, and came back in 67. So I won it in 2:18. But that kind of got my name established over there. And from that point on, I got a lot of opportunities to run in America. Yeah. It was just kind of a chance that I got the opportunity in the first place. And then winning the race, of course, helped tremendously.
Yeah. Well, you've got to, when these opportunities arise, you've just got to take them. And then obviously it provided fruitful for your career. So rough, how many marathons would you have done in total then over your career?
Good question. I think it's about, I should know this because somebody just recently sent me a list of them all.
Oh, okay.
Some guys who research all these things, and I think it's 30 odd.
Okay.
I did, as you mentioned at the start, I did 22 sub 220, and then as I got older, I kind of decided I wanted to do a lot of races. I'd never run the Scottish Marathon Championship when I was at my best.
Yeah.
And I thought, before I finish, I've got to try and win a Scottish title. So I did 5 of these, but they were all quite slow times because they came I think the first one I did, I was 37 at the time, and then the last one I was 42 or 43. So, they came at the tail end of my career, and I did quite a lot of slow races at that time. I think, about 30, 35 maybe.
Okay, cool. And, during that time, when you were, in your peak and you were clearly, running all around the world, were you at any point were you a full-time athlete, or were you working as well, or how did that look?
No, I was working full time. I mean, that's the other thing. I think through my running career over the last nearly 50 years, the sport has changed quite dramatically in every sense. When I started off in the second half of the 1970s, it was very much a minority sport. I mean, if you went out running, you were odd. People would shout at you, and you knew every runner because there were only maybe 20 of them in a city. And you knew everybody in the country, basically, that ran, because there weren't all that many that did distance running. And then all of a sudden, it took off, and suddenly thousands of people were doing it. And alongside that came everything else that comes with it. It became a more commercial activity. So the whole development of shoes and running kit, sports science, sports drinks, the opportunities for people to be full-time professional, that all happened in the 1980s. So up until then, everybody, there was no such thing as a professional full-time athlete. And yet we had people at that time like Steve Jones running 2:8, breaking the world record. So, and in Scotland, Alistair Hutton ran 2:9, John Graham ran 2:9. All these guys, we all had jobs, and you just fitted things around that. So, I think that's definitely now there's more opportunities for people to go full-time in the sport and make the most of it. And that's a big step forward. There's, the opportunities are far better now, but it doesn't mean for everybody else that you can't do well if you're not. It's a case of how much you want it. You want to devote what time you have to trying to be as fit as you can be. So you don't have to be a full-time athlete. I guess nowadays at the very, very top level, it probably is, more essential because the standard now is so high. But people do really well.
It's quite amazing. It's quite incredible that you guys were all running, all those sorts of times when you were still, busy full-time jobs at the side as well. So it just proves that it can definitely be done. So,
I think it's not so much a case of the time to train; it's more the time to recover that's the big benefit. You can find I train twice a day, so the way I would work it is I'd start at work early. I'd take a reasonable amount of time in the middle of the day to do my main training session, and then I would train again maybe at 9 o'clock at night. And that was the only way I could fit it in. But it's just finding that recovery in between times. It's far, if you've got the whole day, it's not that you necessarily would do more training, but you've got more recovery opportunity.
Of course.
And that's a big plus.
Yeah.
It's all the same for everybody. It's just getting that balance right between your hard workouts and your recovery, because the recovery is as important as doing the hard session.
Yeah, definitely. So throughout the course of your career then, obviously, I know you raced abroad a lot. We've already touched on some of the different things, but, what are some of the highlights or some of your favourite races that you had over your career?
It's always a difficult question. You have good memories of things for different reasons and at different stages. Obviously, running my fastest time is a highlight because it was the US Championship race at the time, and I finished second. So, and I think I was only ranked 15th in the field that day. So to do that was, in every respect, I was delighted with that performance. But equally winning that Oakland Marathon for the first time was a highlight. So it was the first marathon I won. There used to be a race in England called the Morpeth to Newcastle road race on New Year's Day. It had been going, I think it was first held in about 1902, and it's only about, I don't know, 10 years ago that it stopped. But it was very much, a big, big race through the history of the sport, and virtually every top British distance runner has won it over the years. So I won that one year. So that was a big, big thing for me. It was, it was seen to be a really important race. And it would be, I suppose we put it in the context, it would be the winter equivalent of the Great North Run down there.
Okay, yeah.
But it was, always attracted a good quality field. So even, winning something domestically is a big highlight. And even down to more basic things, I used to like, there was a hill race at Bankery near Aberdeen, the Scolty hill race. It's only about 5 miles, but I think I won that 16 times, or
16
maybe
times.
more. I can't remember now, but it's one of these ones, that you really enjoy doing. So I tried to do it every year if I could. So when you look back and think, oh, well, to win something 16 times over 20 years or whatever is quite good, and I got my most satisfaction the last time I won it because I was getting on a wee bit. So when you can beat some of the younger guys, it's always gives you a wee bit of a kick. So, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of different races that have good memories, and even ones where doesn't have to be about winning. Like Berlin, I finished 6th at Berlin. I really enjoyed that because it was just a great race to be in.
Yeah.
The Berlin Marathon's always been a big event with a tremendous atmosphere, and that year, I've done it twice, but that first year I did it, it was just so competitive. There was very little between the top 10 or 12 finishers. And I remember the last 2 miles, it was like sprinting. It was like you were in a 5K.
Slowing it out.
And the crowds were amazing. It was just everything about it was great. It was just, a good competitive race.
Yeah.
And I remember finishing that thinking, I've got an awful lot more. I'd finished strongly, and it's quite a good way to feel at the end of a marathon instead of the usual.
Yeah, you've got something left.
Yeah. But I think that's the great thing about running. It doesn't matter what level you're at. There's so many ways in which you can get satisfaction out of what you've achieved. Planning to do something, putting in the hard work, and getting the result that you were looking for. It doesn't matter if you're first, 6th, 20th, 200th. If you've felt that you've done well and that the training's gone well, then you got a huge amount of satisfaction. You're not dependent on. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. It's all about what you do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I love about running is that you can see the progression so clearly as well. And, so you're just always sort of chasing after that next logical goal, and you're just progressing all the time. And, when you're progressing all the time, it keeps you motivated to keep putting the hard work in. And then, so it's just like a cycle from there. You're setting goals, you're achieving them, then you're setting higher ones, and then it just keeps rolling from there.
Yeah, and there's so much variation now in what you can go for. You want to stick with 5K, that's fine. There's 10K, half marathons. Ultra running now is big, trail running, hill running. There's so much variety. You can always be finding new targets for yourself. You don't have to. Yeah, it's great to see progression in a particular event, and that's a big motivation. But at the same time, there comes a stage for all of us where that progression slows down or doesn't happen, but there's always something different to aim at. And I think it's good for people to try different things, because you just don't know until you've experienced something, you're not clear as to what you might really enjoy. You shouldn't be put off trying anything.
And sometimes it takes a while to find your niche as well. Some people who don't like the road, don't like running on road, for example, can end up being really successful in hill running or cross country or whatever. And it's just, you've got to find, your niche and what you enjoy and what you're good at. So
Yeah, and there's so many great events now. There's so much to choose from. At least, hopefully, there will be.
Well, hopefully there will be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how you've clearly, I read out at the start, some of the different events, you've raced at and been successful at. So you're pretty much running all over the world at that point in time.
Yeah, I think. Trying to remember now. I think obviously quite a few places in Europe, but United States, Africa, Asia a few times, Australia.
Pretty much hit all the continents.
Just about. I never made South America. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the problem of being a marathon runner is though that there's only so many you can do in a year. One of my mates was a 1,500 meter runner, and he used to say, yeah, he says, I can do 30 races in the summer. I think, great, I can do 2 in a year.
Yeah.
But I kind of probably stretched it. I probably did too many marathons, to be honest. I used to look on maybe doing 2 serious ones and then 2 other ones if I could get away with it. But again, there were so many opportunities. It's difficult to control which ones you do. There's so many things that you would like to do, but you just couldn't do because it wasn't physically possible.
Yeah, you want to do them all, but logistically, it's not really the easiest to do them all.
Yeah, I mean, I did. There was once I was far too ambitious. I ran a marathon in Japan one April, and then I ran Pittsburgh Marathon in America 3 weeks later, and it was. I mean, the one in Japan was a big race, and I ran really hard, so I really hadn't had time to recover. And I went to Pittsburgh, and it was about 35 degrees, and this was the beginning of May, and it was a horrible experience. So I learned a lesson from that. You cannot cram them in too quickly. It was a bad idea altogether.
Yeah. Well, that brings me on to talking about some challenges then, or overcoming adversity during your career. Was there any, difficult moments you had to sort of get over during your career?
Nothing serious, I wouldn't think. I suppose it depends how you react to situations. I remember my first track international. I got called into pretty much late in the day, and the sensible thing to do would have been to say, no, I'm not ready for it. It was a midweek televised meeting at Crystal Palace just before the 1980 Olympics, and I was running the 3,000 metre steeplechase, and as I say, I just wasn't prepared for it. I finished last, and I was so embarrassed because it was, as I say, it was a full house. It was on the telly. And I wasn't just last, and I was convincingly last. I had most of the home straight to myself, and I was getting the sympathetic applause. And I remember finishing that thinking, this is terrible. This is so humiliating, And I thought, right, come on, you've had this opportunity. You were picked because, you weren't the first pick, but you got it because you deserved that. So the thing to do is to make sure next time you are well prepared and that this doesn't happen again. So that was the kind of way I was trying to focus on it rather than be, oh dear, I'm out of my depth. I can't handle this. I had good reasons for not having performed as well as I might have done. So I think you have to, somebody once said that make sure whatever the outcome of a race that you learn something from it, and that there's something positive you can take from it. And I think on that occasion, that was the thing to do. Say, right, okay, you finished last, you didn't run your best. So what were the reasons behind that? And once you've identified that, it's easier to move forward and to plan ahead and more positively and to eliminate the things that caused that bad performance.
I think that's message,
always the case. You've always got to be monitoring, assessing how things are going, and that's part of the whole challenge of running. You're challenging yourself all the time. You're trying things out, seeing how well it works,
trying to get your good performance. And if you do, great, you move on from that. If it doesn't work out, you think, okay, maybe I need to go in a slightly different direction, but it's all part of it. Having a bad day isn't, it shouldn't be a negative at all. It's just, everybody, no matter what walk of life you're in, it's not plain sailing all the time. You just got to assess the reasons behind it and make the adjustments and try the next time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a great message, off the back of any race, whether you perform really well or perform, not what you expected. I think if you can make some learnings from it and know where you can improve next time, then, you've still won at the end of the day, because you know where you've gone wrong and you know how you can change things going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the great thing about running is there's always another opportunity around the corner.
Yeah.
There's always another race.
Exactly. So, okay. So how, when you were, again, training for these marathons, how did your training look back then? What sort of weekly mileage were you doing? What sessions were you doing? That type of thing?
Yeah, that's one thing I do wish I'd kept a better record of what I was doing. I have vague training diaries, but the more about mileage and the type of session rather than the quality of the session. There was no GPS or any form of digital recording.
Were you wearing any sort of watch, or were you just?
Well, quite often not. I mean, generally in races, people wouldn't wear a watch.
Yeah.
I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and I put up 3 photographs of the leading group in 3 different marathons from the mid-'80s. And I hadn't put the photo up for this reason, but it was only when I looked at it, I realised there was maybe 10 runners in each photo. And of the 30 runners, there were only 2 watches.
Okay.
So, and one of them was, one of the runners without the watch was Steve Jones, and I think it was his world record marathon. So, people went very much by how they felt. Yeah. And in terms of racing strategy, it kind of was, if it feels okay, I'll just keep working away.
Yeah.
And Steve Jones is a good example of that. When he broke the world record, his first half was like 61 minutes something, and his second half was 66, 67. So, it's not the way we would tell you to run a marathon, but he broke the world record doing it that way. And a lot of races were like that. It was like everybody just went eyeballs out for as long as they could, and hung on. And, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But possibly that was down to the fact that, it wasn't so straightforward to monitor what you were doing in training. Yeah. So I would do sessions, and I wouldn't really know. I would just gauge. I think, that went well, or it didn't. I would know what I was trying to do. If I was doing, say, 6 by a mile rep with 2 minutes recovery. In fact, I didn't actually do it by time. I didn't do it by distance. I did it by time. I would wear my watch for that, and I would run hard for 5 minutes.
Yeah. And
I quite often would do it on a set route. So I would roughly know how far I should get in 5 minutes if I was having a good day. And if I was on a really good day, I'd normally get further than that. If I was having a bad day, I wouldn't get as far. And that's the only way I judged it. I thought, well, today I've managed, and all 6 reps have gone further than I've done before. Therefore, I must be doing okay. But in terms of volume, I don't know. I mean, I never did a big mileage until I started doing marathons. I think I could run my good 5Ks and 10Ks off 40 miles a week. Up to marathons, I gradually got nearer to 90, 100 miles a week. But even then, I think 1984 was one of my better years, and my average mileage that year was 75.
Okay.
So I had a lot of big weeks, but a lot of recovery weeks. So I had a lot of weeks where I was maybe just doing 25 miles, but a lot of racing. So I raced regularly. So I kind of trained hard for a couple of weeks, easy week race, something like that. And the sessions would be, the training didn't vary too much, regardless of whether it was for 10K or marathon. Basically, people said, if you're training for the marathon, train for 10K and add in a long run. And that way, I think it was quite good because you developed certainly the pace that you needed for the marathon because you were training well for 10K. And then the long runs would be done, again, not scientifically, but a lot of them we used to do, you might regularly do about 20 miles, but half of that would be at marathon pace or quicker. But when that came, we just depend on the group. We would decide after 5 miles, right, we're going to run hard for 10 miles and then regroup and then run another 5 miles easy. So there was no strict planning around it. You had a rough idea of what you're wanting to do. But I would normally start off by looking at maybe a 12-week period, and then I'd put in the races I wanted to do over that 12 weeks and then fit the training round about that.
Yeah.
And certainly, once I got serious about marathons, the marathons became the principal events in the training plan. And certainly, at that point, I definitely always had a plan, because otherwise there was a tendency just to let things drift along from week to week. So having a plan was always the key. Whether and it had to be adaptable as well, because other races, other opportunities might come along during the build-up that were better than the ones that you'd originally planned to do. But so the year would be, look at the 2 marathons you want to go for, put them in, and then see what else you can fit around it.
Cool.
But no social media or nobody else knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
Which I think was quite good, because I think nowadays there's an awful lot of pressure on people. I heard somebody just recently said, I'm not putting that run on Strava because it was a bad run.
People do.
You don't need that extra pressure.
No, exactly. Compare yourself to yourself. Don't worry too much about other people. You can draw on other people for inspiration and things like that, but you can't have an amazing day or an amazing run every single day of the week. There's always going to be the ones that you don't perform at your best, but it's just part and parcel of training, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I'm quite. I was going to say I'm quite glad we didn't have that in my day, but at the same time, it would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Just to see what people are doing, but I think there's pluses and minuses to it. I think there's a lot of good. It's great that you can actually use it as an analytical tool as well.
Yeah.
And you can, just as you've said, it can be an inspiration. You can get ideas from other people. Say, oh, look at that, looks like a decent session. Maybe I could try that. But it's when it becomes a bit obsessive and competitive that people feel they have to run harder on a specific day than they should, because everybody's going to see it. You've just got to do what's right for you. And
exactly.
So what? Doesn't matter what anybody thinks.
Yeah, exactly. And so kind of moving on to the hydration, nutrition side of things, how have you seen that progress over the years since you were running compared to now?
Sorry, the
hydration and nutrition side.
Again, I mentioned earlier that the sport has changed dramatically over the last 30 odd years in every sense. I think we've seen a huge explosion in the amount of sports science activity or research. Not that it wasn't around back then. There were a lot of people doing a lot of work, but I think now the flow of information is a lot better, a lot clearer than it was. I think if I was looking back, I would think in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of sports science research going on, but it was within the sports science community. And there wasn't a link between that and the coaches and the athletes. Whereas nowadays, it's all far more, coaches are more aware of what's going on. There's a lot more sharing of information. Athletes are involved in that. It's easier to find out information, whereas before there might have been a lot of useful information out there, but as a runner, you might not know anything about it.
Yeah.
So I think things were pretty basic. There was no, a lot of the material that's available now just wasn't available anyway, but in terms of nutrition, certainly during races, there was water.
Yeah,
that was basically it. That changed, as I say, within a fairly short period of time as the sport developed and that whole industry developed round about it. But certainly to begin with, when I was running, I never in my marathons took on board anything. I might have a sip of water, and I guess that was probably detrimental to performance when I look back, because there were a lot of races where, for me, the last 5 or 6 miles were a real struggle. I had to dig very deep to keep things going. And whether that was a nutritional thing, getting the pace wrong, or the training wasn't right, and I'm not sure, probably a combination of all three, but certainly that nutrition gap couldn't have helped.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, I think, to run 26 miles hard without taking anything on board at all. And yet there were times when I did it. I felt absolutely fine. That Berlin Marathon I mentioned, I had nothing in that race at all, and yet finished really, really strongly.
Yeah.
So you just don't know. It's very difficult. I think, in my head, there's no doubt that topping up the energy levels is, you can't really go wrong with that. Surely it must.
Well, now I think, if I'm running a marathon, I'm having like 4 or 5 gels, I'm getting water or electrolyte drink every, 3 or 4 miles. So there's plentiful stuff out there.
Yeah, but I think, and I'm not knocking that at all, but I think probably, the human body is very adaptable. And I think because we train like that, I would do regular 20-mile runs, or 2 hour, a Sunday run was regularly maybe 2 hours 10 to 2 hours 25 minutes. So, that's my racing time, and never took anything for these. And I think you maybe train yourself to get by. If you're doing that on a regular basis, your whole metabolism adjusts to be able to make best use of what it's got. And therefore, maybe when it came to the races, you could cope with it. Whereas if you were going out all the time, I see people running 5Ks and they're backing stuff down.
Yeah.
I think you then create a dependency on that. Yeah. So instead of it being a boost, it's just what you expect. Your body's expecting anyway. So I think there's a balance in just getting the right level, that you really do need.
Yeah.
And again, with some of the gels, people have problems with stomach problems and things go wrong because of it. So it's very, very difficult. Whatever, I think folk do have to make sure they're comfortable with what they're doing before they go to their race, and don't do things differently on race day.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to go into technology-wise, and I won't go too much into detail on shoes, because we could probably have a 3-hour podcast on shoes. But what I discussed, you were one of Nike's first runners in the UK. Is that right? You had a bit of a sponsorship deal with Nike.
Yeah, I was again quite lucky being around at that time when the sport was taken off commercially, and Brendan Foster set up Nike in the UK just around the time I was getting international opportunities. And Brendan recruited quite a number of British runners to wear this new brand of shoe. I'd heard of Nike. People occasionally came back from America with these shoes. I was like, oh, what are they? Yeah. But this would be early 80s, 82, 83 maybe. They decided to come into the UK in a big way, and he was given the job of setting them up. So he basically recruited a number of runners to wear these shoes. And even then, you know, some of the first ones that came out, the one I always remember was the Pegasus, which is still on the go today. You know, we're on Pegasus 37 or whatever.
Yeah, 37, I think I'm on now.
Yeah. So I had Pegasus 1. And I remember even then, that was a great shoe. You know, it was a neutral shoe, a kind of lightweight trainer, but you could wear anywhere for everything. And I distinctly remember running through Seaton Park in Aberdeen one day and a guy stopping me saying, "What are these shoes you've got?" I said, "Oh, it's Nike Pegasus." He says, "Oh, right, I must get a pair."
Yeah.
I thought, there you go. The marketing works. But they wouldn't look like the ones now, you know. But they were definitely a step forward from what we were wearing before that, which was basically shoes with a thin rubber sole and a canvas upper, you know, which offered virtually no protection. And yet, I don't think people got any more injured.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, then the whole shoe market went crazy. It went from a stage of, can I get a proper running shoe? And you would take whatever there was, to now there's 100 different running shoes. Which one is it? And of course, nowadays there's a degree to work out what shoe you should be wearing. There was one occasion when Nike asked for feedback on some of the racing shoes, and I had two that I quite liked, one for marathons and one for shorter races. But there were elements of each shoe that I thought, if you put together, would be the ideal shoe for me. So I suggested you take this from one shoe and that from the other shoe and put them together. And they said, "Okay, right, we'll do that for you." And a few months later, these shoes came through the post. And somewhere along the line, the communications had got a bit mixed up, because they'd taken the elements I didn't want from each shoe and put them together and created the most unstable running shoe I've ever found. I could barely stand up in them because the midsole was too squidgy, too soft, and the sole was too narrow. So you had a very squashy midsole on a very narrow sole, so you could hardly stand up. I didn't have the heart to say, "This is totally wrong." When they asked for the feedback, I said, "No, it's not really as good as I thought it was going to be. I'll just stick with the standard models."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, again, there was an awful lot of experimentation going on with shoes at that time. And but now it's, you know, as you say, you could speak for hours about the debate about.
Won't go into that debate.
No, I think generally I've had this discussion with a few people, and my own feeling is that you can't compare one generation with another anyway. You know, you can only look at who's doing what at the time, because that's the only time the situation is the same for everyone. So if everyone can wear these shoes, fine, but you can't say compare performances now with 30 years ago, because the environment's very different. You know, everything's different. Even you go back to the early 20th century, you know, the marathon runners then were running in leather shoes. They were running on roads which quite often weren't even hard surfaced. So if it was raining, they were soft. Their kit, you know, like cotton jerseys and cotton shorts. So, you know, the whole situation was very different. So you can't compare that with even my day, where the shoes did improve quite a lot, but they're nothing like what they are now. You know, you can only really look at how you compare with people in your particular era, I think. You know, because performances should always improve anyway. Undoubtedly, they're making quantum leaps at the moment, but I think then again, you just have to, you have to judge. Somebody said the other day, "Oh, marathon running, 2:05 used to be 2:10. So, you know, if you were a 2:10 marathon runner now, you should be running 2:05." But I don't think you can you can't say that. You've just got to look at how people perform against each other, and that's the only criteria.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's bring it forward into your coaching now, and just full disclosure to the listeners, Fraser is my running coach. That's how we know each other. So, yeah, what's your biggest messages for the everyday runner that's looking to improve? What sort of tips and advice would you give them?
Well, I think quite a few things actually. I mean, first of all, set your goals, whatever they are, and I know folk have all these little ditties that they say that nothing is impossible and all that, but yeah, you have to be realistic. But the bottom line is, if you set a sensible goal, then you've got to think about, how am I going to achieve it? How am I going to commit to doing this? Whatever it is, if it's even, if it's running your first marathon, what do I need? How much time do I need? Which one is it going to be? As I said, I always started with my plan with, where do I want to be? What race am I aiming for? And how well do I want to do in it? And then work back from that, have a plan. If you've got a plan, then you've got that motivation to get out and do it. I don't think you should just say, right, I'm going to do the London Marathon in October, and then operate day to day, think, well, what will I do today? I think if you've got something written down, doesn't matter what it is. If you've got something written down, you've got a commitment to yourself to actually do it. I think you need to look at, be patient as well. You can improve quite dramatically over relatively short periods of time, but give yourself that period of time, and don't look at it day to day. Look at it in the longer time frames, because despite what Garmin says, tomorrow's not always better than yesterday. It's a gradual progression, and your training should be gradually progressive. Don't go from doing 10 miles a week to 50 or 100 miles a week. It's got to be gently moving up through the quality and the quantity and the quality, and try and vary your training as well. Just don't do the same things all the time. You need, certainly for longer distance races, you need that endurance, you need a little bit of speed as well. So you've got to do some of the shorter, faster stuff as well as the long stuff. Don't be one-paced. That's a common problem. I used to know in my day lots of guys that were running 100 miles a week, and then there were, say I was running 2:15 for a marathon, they were running 3:15. Say, I'm doing the same mileage as you. Say, yeah, but what are you actually doing? I'm running it all at 7-minute mile pace. Well, that'll make you very good at running 7-minute mile pace, but it's not going to make you good running 5.5-minute mile pace. So, whatever your target is, if you want to improve your time, you always have to be looking to push the boat out a little bit faster all the time. And don't worry if things aren't going wrong for a wee spell. We all have ups and downs along the way. It's, as I say, it's a case of taking that longer term view all the time. I mean, I ran my best marathon. I'd been running for about 10 years before I ran my best marathon. My PBs at shorter distances came after I'd been running for probably 5 or 6 years. So, it doesn't happen overnight, but along the way, if you're seeing progress, if you're seeing gradual improvements, that should give you that little bit of motivation to know that you're heading the right way. And there's no limit to it. Ultimately there is, but when you're starting off, you can make great strides forward quickly.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working with you, and I asked you how I could get faster, and you put it very simply. You said, "Well, run faster." So, in a nutshell, well, there you go. But that's just something that the highlighting, having a bit of structure to your training. I went from, when I started working with you, 3 hours 45 minutes for a marathon. I've now chalked an hour off of that. So, it just shows that that's over 3 years' time. It hasn't been all of a sudden, it's been gradual, but it just shows with a bit of structure and motivation you can get there.
Yeah, certainly. I remember when I looked at what you were doing to begin with. You've been doing these sort of times for a long time, and you're running. I didn't think quite had that focus, or didn't have, that variation in pace that you need to get the times down. So, it's not always about quantity. It's the type of running you do and having that variety. A little bit of speed work, a bit of endurance, a bit of off-road as well, just to build in the strength to, the whole load of different components that come together to get you into peak condition for what it is you want to do. And I think probably that's important too, that, not everybody's totally focused on a particular distance, but if you want to be the best you can be at 5K or at 10K or the marathon, then the emphasis maybe has to be a little bit different for each of these.
Yeah.
So, like for me now, at my advanced stage, 5K feels like a marathon. So, but I would never think of going out and running for a 20-mile run. My aim now is just to be able to do a park run. So I don't feel the need to do long runs. I still feel the need, if I'm wanting to run a good 5K, I still feel the need to be able to run 10K on a regular basis, just to give me that added strength. But equally, I like to do some shorter, faster stuff because I want to run as well as I can for my 5K, which is about double the pace it used to be. But, and that's the other thing, as you get older, the fact that you get slower isn't a disincentive. I get as much satisfaction now, like last year or the year before when we could do park run. My target was to get under 21 minutes, and I think I did 20:54. And that was great, because that was a target at what I felt was a realistic target for me, and I was really, really delighted to be able to do that. So it's not a case of, oh, well, because you're on 40 minutes, give up now.
Keep doing that forever.
Yeah, you just got to readjust, but that for me is what's so good about running, that you get a lot of satisfaction just from setting your own little goals and being able to achieve them. It doesn't have to be world beating or anything like that. It's just, if you can achieve what you set out to achieve, then you get a lot of satisfaction from that.
Yeah, and well, just before we start rounding up, just to tie in there, when I was looking through your stats and things like that, it became evident that you were winning and being quite successful in events, towards the end of your competitive running career. So, for the masters athlete or the people who are towards the end of the running career, what tips have you got for increasing their longevity?
Yeah, well, I think there's two important things. I think aging in itself isn't a huge factor until probably, I guess it's different with everybody, but mid-50s, to be honest. There's a lot of work done about aging and and athletic performance, and a lot of the theory seems to suggest that if you can stay mentally motivated and physically undamaged, so i.e. you haven't had a lot of bad injuries, and you retain your enthusiasm, then there's no reason why you can't perform to within, a good few percentage points of your best. The reality is that as we get older, we do lose a bit of enthusiasm for it because you've been doing it for so long and other things become maybe more important in your life. And the reality is, if you've been running for 30, 40 years, you maybe have picked up more injuries that are going to slow you down. So I think taking account of all of that, the motivation is a big thing. And I think increasingly as we move forward for everybody, the kind of mental aspects of running related to performance are going to become more important. But as you get older, retaining that enthusiasm can be done, I think, through a number of ways. As I say, for me, I know I'm not going to run PBs anymore, but I can just readjust the target, or do something completely different. Do events that you've never done before, then you'll get a PB. If you've never done it, then you can, whatever you do is going to be your best for it. But I think the key thing is rest and recovery. It's important all the way through for every runner every athlete, no matter what level, and I keep stressing this, that your recovery days, whether they're active recovery or total rest days, are equally important to the days when you do your hard workouts. So, and as you get older, I think that becomes more and more important. You cannot go out and bash away day after day. You need more time to recover to get the benefit of what you're doing, and it's that adaptation that happens during rest and recovery that is the key to improvement. Doing the session is one thing. So I can say to you, go out and do 10 by a mile in 5 minutes with a 2-minute recovery. You go and do that. But if the next day or over the next 2 days you haven't recovered from doing that, you're going to start going downhill. So these recovery days are vital. Getting good sleep is, I read a thing not so long ago about all the ways of recovering: sports massage, taking different drinks. Obviously, replenishing your glycogen stores and everything else is important. But this guy said, the key thing, the one thing that makes the biggest difference is a good night's sleep. And, I think it's absolutely right, because when you're training hard, sometimes you don't sleep well. If you're overdoing it, it's usually a sign that you're actually overexerting yourself. Is your body's still too agitated. You can't sleep, and if you don't sleep well, you're not going to recover. Your body's not going to get that adaptation that it gets, that it needs to benefit from hard training. So, yeah, I think that would be the single biggest message.
Cool. Okay, well,
and it applies across the board, but I think as you get older, it's even more important.
Well, that brings us on nicely to our final question, which I like to ask every guest their top tip for improving performance, for recovery, and then for sleep. So we'll just bat into it with you. So what's your top tip for improving performance?
I think I probably just answered that. But top tip for improving performance. I think, to be honest, it's not so much a physical thing. I think it's a mental thing. I think it's about going into, if you're speaking about performance, and if we're speaking about runners going into a race, it's about going in with a very positive mental attitude. Okay. It's about getting to that start line. I like to get to the start line of a big race feeling I've done the hard bit. This is the bit I'm going to enjoy. Your start line of a marathon. Yeah. I'm going to enjoy this. But I think that's the key thing. It's have confidence in what you've done. If you're training, if you've done the training, you should get to that start line feeling only I'm going to achieve today. I am going to do it. I have done hundreds and hundreds of miles, or whatever your training plan has given you over the past 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Get onto that start line and believe, today I am going to do the best for me. I am going to produce the result. I'm going to get the reward that I've been working for. There's no point in doing all that hard work, doing all your preparation, and then getting to the race start line going, oh, it's going to go wrong. You hear so much negative stuff, people that get anxious and worried. And I can understand that, but I think you need to channel nervous adrenaline into positive adrenaline, an adrenaline of excitement rather than concern, and some people sometimes let it go too far the other way. So, yeah, I think in terms of performance on a particular day is always be positive. Yeah. Go and don't think of the bad days. People focus sometimes, I missed that session.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you missed 1 or 2 or 3 sessions out of 100. Why are these 3 going to count badly today? Think of all the good ones you've done. So that's for performance on a particular day. Equally, I think all the way through when you're training or you're running on a regular basis is to just keep that motivation, keep thinking, why I'm doing this, so as I can get that at the end of the day. I'm training for a particular purpose. You've always got that motivation there. So I think, again, just one other thing is maybe to ensure that your training takes heed of the fact that you want to train well on the days that your training sessions require you to train well, and you recover well on the other days. There's no need to go out and run hard every day. In fact, it's counterproductive to do it. You've put the focus on the days that you need to do well, and the other days, doesn't matter what it looks like on Strava. If you have to run 20 minutes a mile, so be it. You have to recover. And as we've just said, there's a number of ways in which you can recover well, but good rest is the key to it.
Cool. And what's your top tip for improving sleep then?
For improving sleep?
Yeah.
Stress, less stress in your life.
Yeah.
Good tip, yeah. Just, and again, I mentioned earlier that sometimes if you're overdoing your training, and it's the same with any aspect of life, if you're overdoing things, you won't sleep well. So you need to look at your whole management of your lifestyle. It's not just about your running, your work, whatever else you're doing. I think if you're not sleeping well, maybe a stress-related thing, and anything you can do to relieve that stress is going to help you sleep, and therefore everything else gets better because of that.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, well. No, I think some amazing tips there, and overall, I think during the course of the podcast, we've got some great inspiration and motivation. So thanks very much for your time today, Fraser. It's much appreciated.
Thanks very much. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Fraser.
Stick in with your training.
I will. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Cheers, Brian.
Thanks so much for listening to the latest episode of the HBHM podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Just a reminder that you can get 15% off at checkout on hbhm.com by putting in the code HBHMPod. Please share the latest podcast on socials. At Instagram, we are at HBHM Official, and we look forward to speaking to you next time.